repeat, I'm going to give the question and I'm going to give it again. I wrote it, and it's too wordy. But I couldn't find any way to reduce it, so I'm just going to repeat it. Should the federal deficit be reduced from its current annual amount of $1.4 trillion? And if so, what combination of revenue, spending, regulation, deregulation, or anything else would you recommend in order to best reduce the deficit? Again, should the federal deficit be reduced from its current annual amount of $1.4 trillion? And if so, what combination of revenue, spending, regulation, deregulation, or anything else would you recommend in order to reduce the deficit? No, Neil, we always have these double headers here.
Something tells me this might be a trick question. By a show of hands, does anybody want the deficit to stay at 1.4 trillion? But I'm seeing it, because I don't know. That's a good question. I just want to make sure that they're what I'm saying. We have to reduce spending. I am on my website, and since January of 2010, I've told everybody that I am for cutting every agency in the federal government by 10% and continue to move on up. Because the only way that we can control the federal government is making it really, really small. The waste in the federal government is, I can't even explain to you how bad it is and how many agencies the federal government has and how many jobs they create, and their salaries, coincidentally, let's see, their salaries are more than the private sector. They average more than the private sector. And then not only that, they have something called a pension, which at my job, I don't have. So not only are they making more money than the private sector, government jobs are averaging, they have what's a little, what I call the bonus date, is that when they retire, they get something. Right now, I work for a small firm on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. When we're out of business, I'm done. There's no money, there's no gravy train coming to me, and if I retire at, at age 65, then I'm going to expect my employer to pay me something for the rest of my life. It doesn't work that way. But in Washington, D.C., oh, it works that way. And that's why people who want to get elected in Washington, D.C., after a small amount of time, they get a pension. That's why you're going to see so many politicians who want to win a few terms, because then they get on the gravy train. And you know who pays for that? All of us in this room. Because the job I have, and I'm sure the majority of the people in this audience, the job they have, when they retire, there's no free money going to them. We have to cut spending. You can go on YouTube. I've always said, our job, my job, is to cut, 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 until it hurts. Because the private sector, the public sector, we have to decide as Americans what's more important. As I said before, is that a trick question? The trick question is this. What's more important to you, the private sector or the public sector? Answer that and you got my answer.
The federal deficit clearly is far too big. It was too big when it was about a third of the size that it is now, or somewhere between a third and a quarter actually, at the start of this administration and this current Congress in 2008. We need to relieve your burdens. We need to grow the economy. If we grow the economy, then a rational tax structure can actually raise revenues. And we know that from the Reagan tax cuts in the 1980s. The Reagan tax cuts actually resulted in a net increase in federal revenues because there was increased investment, increased business activity, increased productivity, and everybody won. So we need to have a jump start for the American economy, along with a permanent plan to make sure that the size and scope of the federal government are controlled and that we are pro-growth. Mitch Daniels had an article today in the Wall Street Journal, and you may have seen it, but he has several proposals that will help businesses, small and large, to do things more vigorously and better. He proposes an emergency vacation from the payroll tax, which actually would be a very good way to immediately bring some monies back into our economy so that people can buy and be clients and do the things that we'd like to do here in Orange County so that our businesses can thrive. He's also proposed a series of measures that will help businesses do more and faster, including having a window on regulation so that there can be relief from burdensome regulations, which also are part of our problem. So they want to propose that businesses will have a window so that they can comply with current regulations and not be penalized down the road if regulations change during this window. I think that's another great suggestion. If we reduce the capital gains tax to 0, that would be another great way to grow the economy. We have to suspend, repeal, replace, defund, depower the new health law. That is a major drain on the economy. It is going to get worse. I think we will certainly have the votes to defund and depower it, and if we can repeal it, we will. So that's another way in which we can help things grow, and also cut the expenditures of the federal government. We're going to have to take a look at all the programs that are non-military discretionary spending, and as the Cato Institute has recommended, think hard about privatizing them, deferring them to the states, or eliminating them. The most popular one that I've heard about in that regard, of course, is the Department of Education. Unfortunately, since its inception, the Department of Education has had no net beneficial effect on America's students. We need to look very hard at all federal expenditures that way. And when I'm in Congress as your representative, if I have that privilege, I will do so.
We've gotten a tremendous amount of questions from the audience, so we're going to jump to those in order to try to get to as many of those as possible. This was actually 2 questions that seem to combine themselves naturally, so we're going to put them together. What is both your stance on gay marriage and also your stance on the don't ask, don't tell policy in the military?
Running for a federal legislative position, I will not seek to force a definition of marriage on the states. That is a 10th Amendment issue. With regard to don't ask, don't tell, our military leaders are completing a study, it's due in December, on what they perceive to be the potential effects of repealing that measure. And I will respect their judgment in that regard in terms of any vote on that issue as well. We have great needs for our national security. We want to assure that we have manpower that is appropriate and that can work effectively in all the ways in which we need our military to work, both in combat and in support services. So I very much look forward to hearing what our military leaders have to say.
This is why people dislike politicians. The question was asked, where do you stand on gay marriage? And she answered it on a federal basis. The question was asked, where do you stand? Where do you personally stand, Dr. Hayworth, on that issue? It's a simple thing. When a voter or someone asks me a question, I answer. I don't hide behind it. Everyone knows that there's federal questions, there's state questions, and people ask them, and they want their representative to answer them and not hide behind them. It makes no sense to me throughout time, all the politicians spin. It's a simple thing. You want to know my answer? I'm for traditional marriage. I'm against same-sex civil unions. Against. 100% against it. You cannot be for traditional marriage, but for civil unions. It's the same thing, except the N word is missing. That's all. That's for marriage, you guys don't know. But we want politicians in Washington, D.C., and your local level, if they ask you a question, answer it. It's simple. Answer the question. And I would hope, Dr. Hayworth has a 1-minute rebuttal, she has 1 minute to say yes or no. Yes or no. Regarding don't ask, don't tell. I personally don't believe that they should, personally, so you're asking me personally, I personally don't believe that they should serve. But I have served in the armed forces. So I will always put discretion to the commanders out there on the front line that know what's going on. It's easy for me as a politician to tell you, or so-called politician, that, oh, they definitely don't deserve it. When a commander of the armed forces comes up to me and says, Mr. DeCarlo, there's nothing wrong with anyone, whatever they practice, what they believe, I want them to be behind me, then you know what? Neil DeCarlo says, I got your back. But when a voter asks